Hey, it's Corey. Welcome back to another episode of Clixsy Unfiltered. Hey, real quick, I just wanted to interrupt myself and tell you about something that I forgot before I recorded this episode. That's already recorded and processing, so I just wanted to quickly insert this real quick. The page experience rollout is now complete for desktop. Don't confuse this with the local algorithm update that occurred towards the beginning of December. They're not the same thing, but they were happening roughly over a similar period of time. There was overlap between them. So if you're happening to see some disruption in your visibility, some issues with your traffic, this could potentially be a part of it. So if you are a client of Clixsy's, that should not be the case. We've already figured out and made a bunch of adjustments based on what we think occurred in those updates. And so to the extent that we had some clients who were affected by the visibility issues in December, we're already seeing recoveries and they're well on their way to back to where they were prior. But I did want to announce that this happened just yesterday and that Google did roll this out and it should be complete now. So if you've been paying attention to any of the Google updates recently, this one's done. All right, back to today's episode. In today's episode, what I want to share with you is an insight from a topic that has come up several times over the last month or so, and it actually was an issue several times in 2021 for a slightly different reason, and that is what's called Google Possum Filters. Now, I want to distinguish first, before we talk about this any further, the difference between a filter and an algorithm. An algorithm is going to determine where all of the eligible or relevant properties, think websites, Google My Business listings, it's going to determine where they rank. A Google Possum filter, on the other hand, is really only going to concern itself with whether it should rank. And that should help really set the stage for what I'm going to show you. And thankfully, I have a real life example that actually came up over the course of the last couple of weeks. And so I have a really cool way of being able to show you visually and illustrate exactly what happens when Possum is involved. Now, it can manifest in slightly different circumstances, and before I show you, I want to actually describe what those different circumstances might look like. The most common one is going to be when an entity, and by entity, we're generally speaking, we're talking about businesses who are local in nature and who have a Google business profile, right? So a Google My Business, Google Maps, Google Local, whatever you know it as. Google keeps changing the name. So nowadays it's actually referred to as Google Business Profile, GBP for short. Those types of businesses can sometimes end up in a situation where multiple businesses of the same category are in the same property. They have the same address. And unfortunately, Google designed this filter in such a way that their intention was to filter out irrelevant results. And the weird thing is that more often than not, what it does is filter out relevant results that are competitive with one another. So since Clixsy has a significant number of law firms, I'm just going to use that as the example. Let me say that again. Since Clixsy has a significant number of law firms as clients, I'm going to use those as the example. But this is really relevant to any niche. You could look at dentists. You could look at plumbing. There's a lot of different entities that really isn't relevant. It's just the issue that this filter is concerning itself with is whether or not there are two entities sharing the same location. Well, I've seen instances where I had a client and a competitor, and they're both either sharing office space. Weird enough, weird as it sounds, I've actually had that exact scenario. And it was because of some prior arrangement years earlier where they had decided to help each other out because they were friendly and they sent referrals back and forth. And then later on, they both decided to, or one that wasn't practicing personal injury law decided to start. Long story short, once they did that, once they added the category of personal injury to their Google profile, all of a sudden, you start seeing the issue where one shows up and the other doesn't. Another scenario where this can manifest is with the same business having, maybe they're in the same building, but they have multiple GMBs for some reason. Maybe they have an old one, or maybe one erroneously got created. We see all the time where Google will pick up some data from another website and then go create a listing. We actually had this very, very recently where the law firm had a billboard. The billboard had an address. Somehow that data got on the web. Google picked it up. It linked up the name of the firm with the address, and it said, oh, this must be a location of that law firm. And so they created a listing. And oftentimes what you'll see is that you can have if the geographic area of those two listings overlaps with one another, Google will start to choose one or the other. Now, there's a third circumstance that came up very, very recently, and that is that there's a type of Google business profile that is for individuals instead of businesses, and we refer to those as a practitioner listing. In this case, we found a really odd occurrence. The firm ranked fantastically for a particular keyword, and I'm going to show it to you right now live. So here is a case where the law firm does not rank for the term car accident lawyer. But if we flip over to personal injury, what we see is that they rank fantastically, all number ones. Now, I'm not claiming that because you rank for a keyword, you're entitled to rank for another keyword. That's not the point. The point is that clearly you can see that there's been a really good job done optimizing the website and the Google My Business listing to rank really, really well for this particular keyword, okay? It stands to reason that the same was also done for the term car accident lawyers, okay? Here's where it gets weird, though. If it were merely a case of one listing, this one, being really, really strong for the term car accident lawyer, car accident attorney, and this one not being, or also being strong, but maybe not as strong, if they were both competitive listings, and then what you would anticipate seeing is that they would both rank, but one more than the other, right? They would be sort of in a little bit of a tug of war with one another, but that's not what we're seeing here. When you see 21 plus on this listing, what that means is that it is gone. It's entirely out of contention. Google's giving it zero consideration whatsoever. It's saying it's not relevant at all for this term. Now, that's not possible unless what you have is a binary choice being made. Relevant, not relevant. In that case, this is the type of result you would expect to see. You would expect to see strong, weak, and especially if you know which other listing exists that is potentially triggering the Possum update. Strong, but filtered. This is a classic example of a Possum filter, okay? Now, let's talk about one other circumstance where this might be the case, or where you might have a possum filter triggering. There is companies out there whose business model is to build up a really strong brand and advertise that brand through various means, whether it be TV, billboard, SEO, pay-per-click, whatever. They're out there promoting their brand. And then what they do is they get hired by somebody who wants the leads that brand is going to generate, right? If those types of companies go out and the firm that hires them makes an agreement that says, go ahead and create a Google My Business profile, go ahead and do SEO, and by the way, it's totally fine if you share the same address as us. We'll let you create that Google My Business listing, go ahead and put it in the same building as ours, and maybe they use the exact same address. Maybe they don't use the same suite number. Maybe they invent a fictitious suite number, attach it to an office inside or something like that. Well, in any of those circumstances, what we're seeing, and I've seen this firsthand several times, that is triggering a possum filter where you start seeing the two entities, the two Google My Business profiles, in a seesaw where one's getting filtered out for a term, the other gets zero consideration, and then vice versa. So those are, I gave you 4 examples. The two competitors in the same building, right? The practitioner listing, the individual listing, and the main firm, which is the example I gave you in real time. I flipped back and forth and I showed you one ranking, one not, and then vice versa. The other one where Google erroneously picks up an address from some data from somewhere on the web and creates a listing. And the fourth is one of these lead generation brands creating a listing using your address. Each of those can potentially get you filtered out so that you have zero visibility at all for the keywords you want to be ranking for. All right, so that covers everything on what a Google Possum filter is, what it looks like, what the circumstances are now. Last thing I want to do is I want to obviously tell you what you could do about it if you potentially are facing this. Well, the most obvious one is you could call Clixsy and we could take a look at your situation. We could tell you, yes, this looks like a possum filter, or no, it's something else. And we can diagnose those problems. You could also remediate the problem yourself. And there's a couple of different ways. In the circumstance with the practitioner individual listing, I will tell you what I think the solution should be from best case to kind of worst case. Okay? Best case. The individual says, oh my gosh, I didn't know that this kind of thing would hurt the firm. Do whatever you need to do. Great. We're going to have the main firm claim ownership of that individual listing. We're going to contact Google. We're going to merge them. We're going to tell Google, hey, guess what? These two listings are actually the same thing. Squish them together. They become one. Cool thing about that one is if the individual has put in some really hard work and they've made it and they've gotten reviews, there's a high probability we can get those reviews moved over, and now your review count for the main firm also benefits. Less than optimal next would be that you do what's called de-optimization. Okay, what this would entail is taking the various criteria and aspects of the listing that give it more relevance and more authority and attempt to diminish them. What are some of those things? Well, the title is probably one of the most significant right now. Okay, so if the title of the listing has keywords in it, gone. If the listing itself Every Google My Business listing or Google Business Profile, they've renamed it so many times. There's always a website button on these listings. If that website button links to the same website as the main firm, guess what? They're competing with each other. They're telling Google that these entities are either the same or closely related. And so what's Google going to do? One or the other. They're going to filter them out. Another solution, let's say you're in this scenario that I showed, and maybe the individual says, hey, man, listen, I love the firm. I want to do what's right, but I also got to do what's right by me. I worked really hard for all those reviews. Those reviews are real. They're mine. This is my practitioner listing. I'm an individual. I have the right to have one of those. It's like, okay, sure. In that situation, what you might want to consider doing then is follow step 2, de-optimize the listing. Or maybe they say, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, great. Then the one thing that actually two things that absolutely have to happen is they can't share the same address. So you got to figure out a solution. Now, maybe that looks like them getting a different office. Maybe they get an office sharing space just for the purposes of moving their Google Business Profile. Perhaps what it looks like is turning their listing into what's called a service area listing. What that means is that the address is not publicly available. Nobody can see it, but you tell Google what the radius is of the area you serve. And this is most commonly utilized for home service businesses like plumbers and electricians and stuff like that. So you have a location where it's not very common for a client or a customer to come to your location. You typically go to them. Well, that may or may not apply in this scenario that I'm creating, but what it would allow for is being able to not anonymously, but it would allow you to move it to like a home office, for example, and not have your home address publicly available, because you're simply saying, well, I serve this area, but I'm not going to make public my address. So, and then the other thing is, again, if they're both linking to the same website, you would want to either remove that link or you would want to diminish the page authority on the main website. You would want to do what you can, perhaps. Some of this stuff is a little bit technical and it gets into some SEO terminology, but de-optimize that page. Do everything that you can to try as best as possible to not pass authority, or relevance to that competing listing. And then, of course, in the last circumstance that I talked about, where these lead gen businesses are setting up shop using your same address, you just need to demand that that's not how it goes. You need to say, look, if we're going to have this arrangement, that's all well and good, but you need to find an address that isn't going to compete with my Google Business profile. And, I don't know if that makes it not worthwhile because the cost goes up or whatever. I don't know. I think that this is sort of a fundamental flaw in the business model of some of those businesses. And, they probably weren't really aware of it at the time. Maybe even prior to the Possum Filter becoming a thing. Maybe it didn't matter all that much at some time in the past, but it does now, and you need to be aware of it. So, if you've run into this type of situation, give us a call. We're happy to take a look at it for you, answer any questions. As always, we're laid back. There's no obligations or whatever. We're happy to talk to you about it, and if we can help, great. If we can point you in the right direction, fantastic. We're happy to do whatever we can for you to just be helpful and add value. So again, my name is Corey Vandenberg. I'm with Clixsy. This has been an episode of Clixsy Unfiltered. Thanks so much for joining me today.